The prince and princesses had received invitations at their own homes from the quartermaster of the palace, but as each princess was allotted accommodation for one lady only, and each prince for one gentleman, their suites were lodged in hotels hired for them, for it was not considered sufficient to present to the Empress all who were on duty during this journey. Besides, the officers and ladies of the household who had not taken part in it, such as colonels, generals of the guard, and the grand officers of France and Italy, but there still remained the duchesses and the princesses and the wives of the grand officers. These arrived on the 28th to be presented on the 29th. The invitation was as follows. Court dress must be worn, as there will be great difficulty in obtaining post horses, particularly for the return. You should, if possible, bring your own. 21 leagues. However, it was a great honor and eagerly sought after. 3 relays were required, which necessitated 12 horses, besides one for the outrider who preceded the carriage. Court dress was essential, as it was compulsory for the presentations, but Charbonnier, the fashionable coiffeur, had arranged to be a compagnon. Otherwise, the Grand Marshal would lend his wife's waiting woman. After this brief honeymoon, Napoleon wrote to the Emperor of Austria, Monsieur, my brother and father-in-law, your Majesty's daughter has already been here 2 days. She fulfills all my hopes. And these 2 days I have not ceased to give and to receive from her the proofs of the tender sentiments that unite us. We are in perfect agreement. I shall do everything to promote her happiness and shall owe mine to your Majesty. Your Majesty will therefore permit me to thank you for the splendid present you have made me, and your paternal heart may rejoice in the assurance of the welfare of your beloved child. To which he added, your Imperial Majesty must never doubt my sentiments of esteem and high regard, nor above all the tenderness I have vowed to her. Was this not indeed a feudal effusion, whereof Martinville had betrayed the secret? By the Emperor's own direction, they departed for St. Cloud on April 2nd, but the religious marriage would be celebrated at the Tuileries. Accordingly, on March 30th at midday, he left Compiègne in a coach with the Empress and the Queen of Naples. On entering the department of Seine-et-Oise, likewise on their entry into the department of the Seine, they received congratulations from the prefects and the departmental authorities. Between Sten and Gagny at 4:40, the prefect, accompanied by the sous-prefect and 51 mayors, surrounded also by an immense crowd on foot and on horseback, received the Emperor and Empress in front of the marvelously decorated pavilion. The weather was foggy, cold, and damp, but hindered no one, said Madame de Beaumarchais. There were at least 400 carriages, and crowds of ladies from Paris, exclusive of young men on prancing horses. It was a counterpart of Longchamp. Their Majesties were very late. Unfortunately, the Emperor was in a hurry to arrive at St. Cloud, where he was expected at 5 o'clock, so in military fashion he cut short the speeches, of which he had not heard a syllable. The carriages did not stop for more than 5 minutes. Then the horses were whipped up, and the cortege went off at full speed. At Port Maillot, the horses were changed. The Emperor's equipage formed a procession composed of 5 carriages drawn by 6 horses, and 2 having 8, escorted by dragoons and chasseurs of the guards. A salvo of 100 guns, together with the band of foot guards and lines of grenadiers, greeted them at St. Cloud. At the foot of the grand staircase of the princes, princesses, and the grand dignitaries who had returned from Compiègne waited to salute their Majesties as they passed through the grand apartments to those of the Empress. In the evening, there was a family dinner, which should have been followed by a presentation of the Italian court ladies, but this was, however, postponed owing to a change in the program. On the day of the Empress's arrival at St. Cloud, no presentations will be made except of the princesses and princesses of the imperial family and of the grand dignitaries who will be presented on Her Majesty's arrival. Should there be a reception after dinner, none but persons who have been presented will be admitted to it. All these details are of the utmost importance in the mind of the Emperor. A commission of exterior relations had been charged to inquire whether the ceremonial arranged at Vienna had been in conformity with that followed on previous occasions, and to ascertain that no possible slight had been shown to the ambassador extraordinary. So much for Vienna. In Paris, the alterations in the program of ceremonies were so numerous that it became necessary to suspend the distribution of the sheets of already printed on March 23rd, as they were being revised up to the last hour. Investigations were made as to the witnesses who had assisted at the marriage of Louis XV and Louis XVI on either side. Eventually, after serious examination, Duroc informed the Grand Master that there should be no witnesses. The following question was put to Autoriva. What was the position of the ambassador of the nation of a foreign princess upon the occasion of her marriage with a French sovereign or prince in person according to the ancient custom? After an exhaustive search, Autorive excused himself for lack of documentary evidence. The same, however, was not the case with regard to the notifications of the marriage. He was able to avail himself of the constant usage of the court of France, at least since the reign of Louis XIV, by which the marriages of the royal family had been notified by ambassadors or diplomatic agents, and was therefore able to decide against the gentilhomme ordinaire of the king, who in 1778 had claimed the prerogative of notifying the birth of princes and princesses of the royal family at foreign courts. As a matter of fact, the emperor had not yet resuscitated the gentilhomme ordinaire. On this occasion, diplomatic agents would suffice. Later on, for the birth of the princes, further arrangements would be made. To return to presentations, the following were made on the day of the civil marriage. First, the ministers, the cardinals, and the grand officers of the empire, or those who had precedence and enjoyed like prerogatives. Next, the wives of ministers and grand officers. No other presentations were to be made, although a large concourse would attend on that day at St. Cloud. It will be permissible to take up a position as His Majesty passes. The curtsies will constitute a presentation. Care must therefore be taken that each, in according to precedence, and that the wives take among themselves the rank of their husbands until after the presentations. The guests will not be admitted promiscuously. The decision as to details of etiquette were innumerable, because they would constitute a precedent, and had to include the two courts of France and Italy, and would in future be the model for Naples, Madrid, Amsterdam, Cassel, Florence, and wherever else there were Napoleonic courts. The emperor appeared to take a singular pleasure in this meticulous and sometimes childish labor. He delighted in it and elaborated it. Doubtless he saw points in it which 50 years of democracy hinder us from appreciating, and for which a parallel could hardly be found even in the so-called monarchical states. He fastened on them as if they were serious matters, and if he varied the details, it was because he brought to bear on them such differences of appreciation as usually attain to minutiae. A ceremony of peculiar character preceded the marriage. On March 31st, the Comte de Remusat, first chamberlain and master of the wardrobe, set forth at 11 in the morning from the Tuileries with 3 court carriages, preceded and followed by an escort of 25 men. He was received at the door of the Archbishop's palace by 2 canons, and at the foot of the staircase by 2 vicars general, and was conducted by 3 vicars general and 6 canons to the chamber in which the crown and mantle of the Empress were deposited. These were carried to his carriage and deposited on the front seat, while he sat respectfully at the back. The first carriage contained 4 canons in cassocks and long cloaks, the second the crown and mantle with the Bishop of Liège and the master of the wardrobe, the third 2 vicars general and 2 canons on arrival at the Tuileries, while Monsieur de Remusat and the Bishop of Liège bore the imperial mantle into the Emperor's chamber and handed it over to the Grand Chamberlain. The sentries of the Salle des Gardes presented arms, and the drums beat a salute. Monsieur de Montesquieu deposited the mantle in the chapel and mounted a military guard over it. The cortege, with its escort, continued on its way to St. Cloud. On its arrival, it received a salute from the sentries of the Salle des Gardes and drummers. The deputy governor of the palace received the cortege at the entrance to the chapel in which the crown was deposited. deposited upon a cushion in the center, where it was guarded by 2 attendants while it remained there. This crown was the subject of a special edict of the emperor. On the day of her marriage, he wrote, "The Empress will wear the coronation crown, which is not beautiful, but which has a particular significance, which I desire to attach to my dynasty. It is only to be worn on the most solemn occasions. For ordinary ceremonies, the Empress will wear the closed diamond crown, which has no special feature, and which I have ordered to be made for her out of crown diamonds. On the day after the marriage, she will wear the closed diamond crown for her reception." So anxious was the emperor that everything should proceed according to his regulations that he wrote on the margin of one of the numerous drafts submitted to him by the Grand Master of the Ceremonies, entitled "Arrangements for the Marriage of His Majesty," "Return to the Grand Master of Ceremonies for transmission to each Grand Officer, in order that every precaution shall be taken for the prompt execution of each part in the present arrangements." This he signed. Zaire was performed at the Court Theatre on March the 31st. This was Marie Louise's first introduction to the French theater. Evidently, the choice was made by the emperor, for no subordinate would have suggested it. On April the 1st, in the Gallery St. Cloud, the civil marriage was solemnized. A platform had been erected on which were placed 2 thrones surmounted by a canopy. At the foot of the platform and at the side of it were an inkstand and the registers of the civil state, arranged on a cloth-covered table. The masters and officials of the ceremonies had placed the officers and ladies not on duty behind the platform. In front of it, all the privileged ladies and ambassadors, cardinals, and ministers, each of whom held an important office or took a prominent position. At 2 o'clock, the cortege started, displaying all the pomp of France and Italy before and behind the emperor. Their majesties seated themselves upon the thrones. The princes of the imperial family and the princes who ranked as grand dignitaries sat upon chairs on either side of them according to their family rank. The secretary of the civil state of the imperial family was in front of the table. The emperor being seated, the Grand Master of the Ceremonies proceeded to announce the Prince Arch-Chancellor, who thereupon placed himself before the emperor's throne, and after an obeisance proclaimed in the name of the emperor, whereupon their majesties rose. He then continued, "Sire, does your imperial and royal majesty declare that you will take in matrimony her imperial and royal highness Marie Louise, Archduchess of Austria, here present?" The emperor replied in the exact words used by Cambyses, after which the question was put to the archduchess, who replied, whereupon Cambyses concluded, "In the name of the emperor and of the law, I declare that his imperial and royal majesty Napoleon, emperor of the French, king of Italy, and her imperial and royal highness the Archduchess Marie Louise are united in matrimony." Their majesties then resumed their seats. The table was placed before them, and the Grand Master's ceremonies handed them the pen. They remained seated while they signed. The members of the family signed standing, followed by the Arch-Chancellor and Secretary of State. The Grand Master announced the ceremony over, whereupon the cortege reformed and returned to the apartments of the Empress.